Hello, I'm Andre J, and today we are going to talk about the 1.5 updates to Chromatic Aberration, the search for Sasquatch. So there's something a little bit different about this one than most of the other ones you may have heard of from the VSERPI. Like wave pool, temporal vortex, spectral mesh, all those things. Those are ones where I was like, oh hey, I'm gonna advertise and try to sell these, and like I have them for sale on the Etsy shop. But then there was also these other titles available that I never tried to sell. Chromatic Aberration and Super Heckle Adventures would be the two ones I think folks knew about. And the model for those was like, well, once you have any of the VSERPI, if you bought a wave pool or you built your own wave pool, basically, the thing is that you could just swap out the SD card or use the master boot option to then play with any of the other instruments that I've designed. And I was like, well, I mean, the originally for Chromatic Aberration, I was like, it didn't really feel like it came together enough to be like, I'm going to sell this. But now I'd sort of like to think everyone to think about anything I make in the future being sort of along this model. I'm not really sure right now. You may know already that as of a couple like a week ago or so, I've closed down the Etsy shop for sales because we can't find Raspberry Pis anymore. And I would be interested to see if, as an ongoing model for research and development and production and releases and stuff, if we could just simply bypass the whole thing where I pretend like it's even remotely hard to build these and assemble and test them, and just say I'm gonna publish, I'll publish the image, the firmware thing, and make sure the instructions on how to build your own are really simple. They are really simple. Like it's simpler than making Legos. I have made Lego sets that are more complicated than assembling one of these, and just say, okay, folks, if you really want to get at these sort of amazing open source, public domain video art tools, you're going to have to step up to the bat a little bit and put them together yourself. It's really not hard. I'll make sure that I provide all the sort of information and documentation, and make some videos and shit that goes into how you want to build them and everything. But for the future, I think I would like for everyone to think about these as not a consumer device, but as sort of just a shareware or whatever. Where you get to take part in assembling your own. You have actually a bit of agenda and control and design and how you're going to make this thing happen for yourself, instead of just relying on someone you perceive like some outsider to do all this stuff for you. I still want to design and put together stuff like this, but I think in the future I'd like to sort of try out this sort of Patreon model, where if you're interested in supporting me, you're I recommend subscribing to my Patreon at some sort of financial level and helping me fund the sort of development and documentation of synths like this, instead of the old school thing where it's you're just going to pay me to build this and mail it out to you. We can save a lot of time and energy, and also I feel this is going to be helpful for every individual actually using these things, just to sort of realize basically how, one, simple it is to put something like this together, and two, once you start realizing that you have the ability to sort of take part in your own what tools you want to use, to understand that this is something you kind of do for most, maybe not most, but a lot of video art and video synthesis tools that are out there, is you can actually build your own instead of relying on consumer situations. Now, unfortunately, the DIY thing for Raspberry Pis is kind of out for the moment. These things, because they're basically just not going to be really available in high numbers for the immediate future. But for everyone who's interested in working with this kind of stuff and doesn't already have the VSERPI thing, all the stuff assembled already or at their fingertips, the main thing I want to work on with this Patreon is making the desktop stuff more accessible to everyone. so that even there will be Raspberry Pis in the future, but not, there's not going to be like a couple thousand of them available for sale tomorrow. So getting people interested more in the sort of desktop app side of these things, I think, is like really important, because for a lot of people, they're like aren't really going to have access to all of these tool sets in the same amount. But at the very least, if you have like a laptop around or an old computer, like, you should be able to get something running. So yeah, generally speaking, if you subscribe to the Patreon, you're not just helping me fund research, development, maintenance, and documentation, but you're helping basically everyone else in the world too, because there's a lot of people out there who have very different standards of living and standards of income, because they don't live in like North America or the United Kingdom. They live in a country where like the price of technology is way higher than it would be here, so they just have less access to things. So if you subscribe, you're also helping provide tool sets for other people who like wouldn't be able to subscribe, wouldn't be able to like pay for this shit as easily. But yeah, so that's the spiel for that. Yeah, so Chromatic Aberration, the search for Sasquatch. So this is a colorizer-solarizer, an 8-band colorizer and solarizer. What is a colorizer? So I might be completely wrong on this, as I might be completely wrong on like everything I ever say in any of these videos ever. But to the best of my knowledge, colorizers first became like devices that were used, broadcast studios who wanted to rerun black and white episodes of like, I Love Lucy or some crap like that. Were like, once the color standards for broadcast video came into play, they're like, nobody's gonna want to see I Love Lucy in black and white when everything else like we're doing like real time now is in color. So they're like, how do we add color to this black and white video? And the answer was, so you build a little device that takes in the video and then allows you to take brightness gradients and then assign different hues to each one. So that's the original kind of colorizer that I'm aware of. I think the first video artist who built their own colorizer for use for like art purposes was Eric Siegel. I could be totally wrong on this one, but that's the knowledge I have at the moment. Another really notable use of a colorizer was in the Scanimate system. The Scanimate analog computer system did all of its main sort of processing, like the sort of like 3D graphics stuff, the vector synthesis things that were happening, were all done in like monochrome. And at the end of the Scanimate chain was an 8-channel, I think, soft key colorizer, an 8-band soft key colorizer that allowed them to sort of like bring everything together in that really sort of like smooth, like vibrant, saturated, like really distinct, like it's just like, it's hard to refer to it as anything other than just like Scanimate, because nothing else really ever looked like that. And if you're interested, look up Scanimate on YouTube and like check out some of like the demo reels. You'll recognize almost certainly, if you've like watched television or commercials from like the 70s or 80s, you'll recognize some of the animation techniques like immediately. So that's what a colorizer is. Solarizers are not quite as common, and I mean, strictly speaking, this isn't really a solarizer, but it's, one word I can throw in there that sort of tells you what's going on there. So similar to that, we can like take brightness and like chop it into ace slices and then assign a different hue to each one of those slices. I figured since we're doing that as well, we've already got these slices allocated. It would be interesting to be able to like control the brightness for each one of these slices as well individually. And you can kind of see that's what's going on in this video here, where like this, looks like it should be quite bright, right? It's pretty bright in the video above, but on the video here it's quite dark. So maybe a better way, like you can do solarization with this, which is basically like applying like a curve to the brightness. But you can think of this as just being like a way to like assign like an 8-point like curve to the brightness. Might be really confusing right now, but I'll go through it all in detail later. But so 8-band colorizer, 8-band solarizer, and what else Chromatic Aberration, the search for Sasquatch, has is the ability to modulate the hue and the brightness separately with individual LFOs within each one of those bands. So that's what's kind of going on in the background here. And I think probably to show you like the most interesting kind of video art techniques with this, I'll need to do a separate video where we like throw in some video feedback, and I'll do like a side-by-side where we show like what the uncolorized video looks like and what the colorized video looks like. That'll be in the future. For now, I'm just going to try to like run through all the 1.5 basics before doing any of the more in-depth videos. But yeah, so without further ado, let's just go into the basics of what's going on for each of these things I mentioned. So if I hit reset, well, it looks like I goofed something up in the resets, and it doesn't reset the brightness LFOs, so I just have to manually turn the amplitude down on each one of those. So that's already a bug fix I noticed for the 1.5. Well, good to always have a project on hand. Okay. We have all the LFOs turned off. So first let's just go over the colorizer part of it and try to explain exactly what is going on with these controls. The control scheme for this is going to be a little bit different, and I recommend pulling up the manual for this. It's a real short one. Basically, like, we're going to think of each of these sets of sliders and knobs together, vertically aligned sliders and knobs. For no matter what the control setting is, they're going to control the corresponding brightness slice. So all the way over to the right, 1 and 8, this slider and knob is going to like control things on the darkest band. When you go all the way over here to like, oh, that's 9, 1 and 9. Do I know how to count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. My bad. I don't know. 8 and 16 will refer to the brightest band. So without any of these buttons pressed, so the way you'll switch different modes is by pressing A, B, and C. The default mode is going to be colorizer mode. So if I twist 8 all the way up, we can see it brings the saturation of the brightest part of the screen up. And if then I move the slider, you see it's going to slide through all the different hues. I do the same for the second brightness band, the second brightest brightness band, crank up the saturation, and then start sliding through hues. And then you can change the hue on the brightest one, and you can see, you can dial in different color combinations there. This is a soft key colorizer too, so there is some amount of like blending in between the bands. Not an awful lot, but some amount. Something I'd be interested to try in future updates is alternating between softer and even softer keys and harder keys. Trying different brightness mappings and stuff like that. But for now, you can do quite a lot with this. You can also adjust saturation levels, and you'll notice that saturation levels will really change your perceived hue. So the saturation at max for this brightest band is like blue. As I start to dial it down, it looks more and more purpley until it gets kind of pink, like a pastel pink, with the saturation pretty low. And then, so your perceived brightness is going to change a lot. And I think that's one of the most interesting creative things you can do with the colorizer, is that by taking like the brightest band of brightness and then doing different things with the saturation and the hue, you can play around with perceived brightness versus the video brightness, if that makes sense. And being able to do everything kind of pastel is pretty fun as well. But yeah, if I just go down from left to right, crank up the saturation first and assign a different hue, you can kind of see, and follow along with me too to get a hang for this, you can kind of see how this sort of brightness slice thing works out. I'm just going to go one by one through each one of them. So you can see that adding the saturation does change the sort of like perceived brightness, and then changing the hue will change the perceived brightness a lot too. You won't really notice immediately when you change the saturation and the hue of the darkest ones, but you definitely will once we start messing around with some other things. So stay tuned for that. And then once you have the saturation cranked on everything and a hue assigned, I recommend then playing around with the different saturation levels and get a feel for how that can radically change the flavor and texture of the colors messing around with one another, like I'm doing right here. A fun one to do is just every other channel to be super saturated and then desaturated. That's what I'm kind of setting up right now. So there we go. That's the basics of the colorizer. The next thing we can do is if we hit the A button, it's not going to change what the knobs do. The knobs are still going to control the saturation of things. Well, actually they don't. Well, I was wrong. I'm going to have to change that in the manual. So if we press the A button, the knobs control nothing. But the sliders will control you'll be able to offset the brightness for each one of these ranges individually. So if I change so I'm going to start from left to right, starting from darkest to brightest, and we'll just do a little bit of an offset on the brightness so you can see what's going on. So that's the darkest band. And you can see, because I wanted the brightness to be continuous instead of wrapping around like hue does, they're going to kind of bounce off. Once it gets super bright, it's going to bounce off and then come back down to dark. And this will make a bigger difference once we're working with the old LFOs. So now I'm working with the second darkest band, and we can bring it up and make that the brightest band. And try third darkest band. A pretty interesting technique that I just sort of tried when setting up for this video is to try and set each band to be about the equal amount of brightness, but have them all be different colors. So you have this really weird thing going on where everything's kind of the same perceived brightness, or the same processed brightness, but then once you when you're looking at it, you see it all as being different actual brightnesses because they're all different hues. There's some of the things that are happening in the video are happening because of the auto exposure too. So sometimes it'll be fun to keep auto exposure on your cameras or off. If you're working with a USB camera, of course you're kind of stuck with auto exposure on. But otherwise, yeah. So this is sort of what the solarizer means. Is things are going to kind of bounce around like that. I tried to make it so every single brightness band you could get to every other range of brightness from it. I may have fucked something up. It may not actually work like that, but hopefully that's how it works. And then the next thing we can do, if we press B, all the sliders and the knobs are going to do something else, for sure, for real now. So if I start with brightness band 4, I turn the knob up to about halfway, and then I start bringing the slider up for the fourth band of brightness. You see it's going to start to cycle. It's going to hue cycle. So this is where the LFOs, the individual band LFOs, comes in. Let me go down to 1, the darkest band. Turn up the rate, that's the knob, and then turn up the amplitude, that's the slider. And then we do band number 2. Yeah, let's try just getting every single one of these hue LFOs going. It can start to get a little insane really quickly. Because as I've said before, perceived brightness and hue are linked pretty crucially. Yeah, so here we have pretty much the hue LFOs for everything are running right now. And then if I hit, so we got A, B, and then C, that's going to control the individual brightness bands. Oh yeah, the reason that this is called Chromatic Aberration, the search for Sasquatch, is, a chromatic aberration is a totally different thing. like in terms of like what it actually means. So the title is totally a misnomer and doesn't refer to anything to do with colorizing or solarizing. I just thought it was a cool name. I call it the Search for Sasquatch because this would actually be the perfect thing to bring out in the field when you're doing, so you've seen like the video, the Sasquatch video and stuff, and it's really blurry and you can't really make anything out. But think about if you went out on a Sasquatch hunt and you had a little device where you could do real-time control of brightness and hue. You could do things where you really bring out the Sasquatch in the forest in your video and make it so people would be much more inclined to believe that you've seen a Sasquatch, let alone filmed one that was like bright, pulsing neon orange on like a pastel purple background. So yeah, this is also just a very useful tool for the amateur or professional Sasquatch hunter, not just for video artists. This could also be applied to moth people, the Loch Ness Monster, assuming you have like an underwater rig you can plug this into, Muklimimbi, Yeti, Skunk Ape, Thunderbird, you name it. Anything that you might want to videotape and sort of help bring out any sort of cryptid that you're interested in videotaping. You want to make sure you can bring out the details. An 8-band colorizer solarizer is definitely going to be a crucial tool in your belt. But yeah, I think that's about it. That's about all of the basics that you need to know to get started with the colorizer, with this particular colorizer, or, you know, just basically the idea of colorizers in general. Unfortunately, there aren't a fuck ton of colorizers out there available on the market. One I do recommend is Syntony, Bastien. They've got like, they have like a design, they sell kits. It's a recreation of like, I think like a colorizer circuit from the 80s. It's very much like a hard key kind of deal, but definitely recommend looking into that. That seems like probably the best option for colorizers you can get for other than, since you can't really buy a Raspberry Pi right now or buy stuff from me. You will probably be able, I'll do some limited sales of things this year because I will still probably be getting like limited quantities of pies in at some point. If you go to my website, you'll find a bunch of places where you can sign up and get on the list to be notified when sales begin. And you do need to be on the list if you want to get a sale, if you want to buy things from me at this point. The Etsy shop most likely will not be reopening anytime soon, if at all. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Already did the Patreon spiel. If you've already signed up, you know, bug some friends of yours or other people to get involved in it, or don't. I mean, if I just have to like go out and like get a real job again and like leave this sort of stuff behind, like that's just like what's gonna happen. So we'll all do what we gotta do. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and as always, have fun.